January 1944. A humid dawn drapes the dense jungles of a Pacific island in a heavy, almost suffocating fog. The air is thick with the smell of salt, sweat, and the faint tang of smoke from distant skirmishes. Japanese soldiers crouch silently in reinforced bunkers, their rifles trained on the approaching silhouettes of Marines trudging through the undergrowth. Each step through the mud and tangled vines is slow, deliberate, as the oppressive quiet stretches taut with anticipation. Then a low hiss cuts through the air. A soldier freezes. A spurt of flame erupts from a steel nozzle, lapping hungrily at the bamboo barricades and pillboxes. The intense heat warps the air, a wall of fire advancing relentlessly, consuming wood, leaves, and the morale of those trapped inside. Bullets and bombs had come and gone, leaving many untouched. But this was different. Smoke and flames claw at every corner, every hiding place. Panic surges through the defenders as they realize the weapons they had relied on for years. Rifles, grenades, artillery offer no shield against the encroaching inferno. The nightmare had arrived, and it had a name: the flamethrower. By the early 1940s, the Pacific War had become a brutal contest of island by island, each fortified with trenches, bunkers, and natural obstacles. The Japanese military, steeped in years of rigorous training and a doctrine of tenacious defense, had built positions that were notoriously difficult to overcome. From Iwo Jima to Saipan, their soldiers relied on carefully constructed fortifications, hidden tunnels, and overlapping fields of fire to turn any assault into a deadly gamble. In these dense jungles and volcanic landscapes, conventional attacks with rifles or artillery were often met with minimal effect. Japanese troops had grown confident, even dismissive, of the American offensive's ability to break through their lines. The United States, facing increasingly costly engagements, needed a tactical edge. Infantry assaults on fortified positions repeatedly resulted in heavy casualties, with frontal attacks often turning into prolonged, bloody stalemates. Early attempts with aerial bombardments and naval artillery provided destruction, but their impact was often superficial. Bombs could tear apart the surface, but Japanese soldiers sheltered in deep bunkers, underground tunnels, and reinforced caves remained largely unscathed. Even small arms fire, which claimed lives in open combat, could not reach those behind layers of bamboo, concrete, or earth. The Americans recognized that breaking these defenses required more than sheer firepower. It demanded innovation, precision, and a psychological weapon capable of shattering the defenders' sense of invulnerability. The Pacific Islands themselves shaped the tactics of both sides. Steep cliffs, dense foliage, and volcanic soil created natural choke points and deadly ambush locations. Japanese engineers exploited these features, carving intricate bunkers into hillsides, lining tunnels with hidden machine guns, and stockpiling reserves of ammunition and rations deep underground. Each bunker was a fortress, and each assault was a perilous journey into a labyrinth where every corner could be a trap. Marines advancing across such terrain knew that conventional methods would lead to heavy losses. The challenge was not merely to kill the defenders, it was to extract them from positions that seemed impervious to conventional attacks. By 1943, U.S. military strategists had begun adapting their approach. The goal was to combine innovation with brute force, to find ways of neutralizing fortified positions while minimizing the human cost to attacking troops. Enter the flamethrower. While crude versions had been used sporadically in World War I, the Pacific War demanded a weapon capable of penetrating jungle fortifications and reaching inside bunkers where defenders hid. The flamethrower was more than a weapon of destruction, it was a psychological lever, exploiting a primal fear of fire that could not be ignored. Unlike bullets or bombs, flames could chase soldiers from their shelters, leaving no corner untouched. It forced them out of the safety of their defenses, exposing them to follow-up attacks. Training for flamethrower operators became specialized and intense. Marines and Army engineers practiced advancing under fire, coordinating with infantry squads to cover the weapon's vulnerabilities. Flamethrowers were slow to reload and required operators to carry highly flammable fuel, making them prime targets if unsupported. Yet, in the hands of disciplined troops, they became terrifyingly effective. Japanese soldiers, who had weathered artillery barrages and machine gun fire with a stoic resolve, found themselves confronting an entirely new form of threat, one that combined physical destruction with overwhelming fear. As the Americans refined these tactics, reports from initial encounters confirmed what strategists had theorized. Flamethrowers were devastating in environments where conventional weapons had failed. Fire could penetrate tunnels and bunkers, smoke could obscure positions, and the sheer terror of flames forced defenders into panic. For the Japanese, who prided themselves on discipline and resilience, the flamethrower introduced a fear that bullets and bombs had never managed to evoke. The battlefield had shifted, and with it, the balance of power in these confined, fortified spaces began to tilt in favor of the attackers. This growing edge in technology and tactics set the stage for the moments when flamethrowers would alter the course of entire engagements. From Saipan to Iwo Jima, the combination of environmental understanding, specialized equipment, and psychological leverage would turn what had been nearly impregnable positions into fleeting moments of human vulnerability. The next phase would explore the technical evolution of these weapons, the coordination required to deploy them effectively, and the Japanese response to a threat they could neither ignore nor counter effectively. The flamethrower used by American forces in the Pacific evolved quickly from a simple incendiary device into a battlefield-defining weapon. Early prototypes had limited range and cumbersome fuel systems, but engineers refined the design to improve portability, reach, and operational safety. The standard-issue M2 flamethrower, carried by Marines and Army engineers, could project a stream of burning fuel up to 20-40 yards, enough to reach into the deepest bunkers or cave entrances. Fuel tanks were worn on the back, and a steel nozzle directed the flame precisely, allowing operators to target fortifications while staying just beyond the line of return fire. This combination of mobility and destructive reach made it ideal for assaulting heavily defended positions where bullets and bombs often fell short. Flamethrowers were never intended to operate alone. Their effectiveness depended on coordination with infantry, suppressing fire, and engineering units tasked with clearing obstacles. Marines learned to advance under cover, alternating bursts of fire with supporting rifle and machine gun fire. Tanks and artillery were often positioned nearby to prevent defenders from regrouping. The goal was precise: flush the Japanese defenders out of their shelters and neutralize the fortifications that had previously stymied American advances. The weapon's psychological impact was as important as its physical capability. Flames reduced resistance not only by burning bunkers, but by instilling a terror that undermined the morale of soldiers who had believed themselves impervious to attack. The Japanese soldiers' initial encounters with flamethrowers were transformative. They had endured aerial bombings, naval bombardments, and relentless machine gun fire without breaking. But the encroaching fire, the roar of flames through narrow tunnels, and the choking smoke presented an entirely new type of threat. Reports from battlefield observers describe moments of sheer panic, soldiers abandoning positions, attempting to escape into open terrain, or succumbing to the smoke inside their bunkers. Discipline and courage, hallmarks of the Japanese military ethos, proved ineffective against a weapon that targeted both body and mind. Flamethrowers also forced tactical adaptations on the Japanese side. Engineers attempted to reinforce bunkers with thicker walls, create branching tunnels to provide escape routes, and develop makeshift countermeasures such as wetting interiors to resist ignition. Yet these solutions were limited and often insufficient. The weapon had exploited a vulnerability that traditional defenses could not address: the universal human fear of fire. American forces understood that while bullets and explosives could wound or kill, fire created chaos, panic, and unpredictability, conditions that could turn even a small assault into a decisive breakthrough. Training for flamethrower operators reflected this dual role of physical destruction and psychological pressure. Operators had to maintain composure under fire, coordinate precisely with advancing squads, and conserve limited fuel while maximizing effect. Many were chosen for their calm demeanor, mental resilience, and ability to operate under extreme stress. The Marines considered them elite, and their presence on the battlefield often marked a turning point in the intensity and outcome of island assaults. The strategic deployment of flamethrowers was particularly critical in the Pacific's dense, fortified terrain. On islands like Saipan and Iwo Jima, Japanese positions were constructed within volcanic ridges and thick jungle, often impervious to artillery. Engineers designed bunkers to resist bombs and bullets, with reinforced concrete ceilings and concealed firing points. Flamethrowers, combined with infantry and tank support, allowed U.S. forces to methodically reduce these positions, clearing tunnels, trenches, and pillboxes. Each advance demonstrated that innovation, rather than sheer numerical superiority, was key to overcoming entrenched defenses. By the time the Americans fully integrated flamethrowers into combat doctrine, the psychological impact on the Japanese was unmistakable. Commanders reported increased desertions, panic during night assaults, and a noticeable drop in morale among soldiers who had previously prided themselves on their fortitude. The flamethrower had achieved what bullets and bombs could not. It made the defenders feel exposed, vulnerable, and hunted. This psychological leverage would become central to understanding why the weapon was feared far beyond its physical destructive power. The stage was now set to explore multiple angles of this phenomenon: the human experience of fear, the tactical applications, technological mastery, leadership decisions, and the enemy perspective. Each perspective would reveal a different facet of how flamethrowers transformed combat in the Pacific, turning fortified positions from safe havens into deadly traps. The human cost of facing flamethrowers was immediate and visceral. Japanese soldiers, trained to endure artillery barrages, machine gun fire, and harsh conditions, found themselves confronted with an elemental terror. Flames consumed bunkers, smoke-choked tunnels, and heat warped the air inside confined spaces. Witness accounts describe soldiers abandoning well-prepared positions, not out of defeat in battle, but out of a primal instinct to survive the fire itself. Morale plummeted. Even experienced veterans, accustomed to the chaos of combat, struggled to maintain composure. The psychological pressure was relentless. Every flicker of flame suggested a breach, every hiss of fuel a death sentence. For the attackers, the presence of flamethrower operators inspired confidence. Marines could advance with the knowledge that entrenched defenders would either surrender or flee, turning what had been deadly stalemates into manageable operations. Fire, in this context, became a force multiplier, reducing enemy resistance and casualties among friendly troops simultaneously. Flamethrowers reshaped assault tactics in the Pacific theater. Dense jungles and fortified bunkers had made frontal attacks prohibitively costly, often resulting in stalled offensives and high casualties. The flamethrower allowed U.S. forces to neutralize these positions without prolonged bombardments. Operators moved in tandem with infantry, supported by covering fire from rifles and machine guns. By forcing defenders out of hidden positions, the weapon created openings for follow-up attacks and minimized exposure to traps. In practice, flamethrowers turned every bunker into a potential kill zone for the attacker, converting a defensive advantage into a liability. Coordination was critical. Operators had to balance aggression with caution, conserving fuel while maximizing effect, and synchronizing advances with squads to prevent counterattacks. In tactical reports, commanders noted that positions previously deemed impregnable fell within hours once flamethrowers were deployed effectively. The weapon became a symbol of precise, methodical assault, demonstrating that innovative tactics could overcome even the most entrenched defenses. The flamethrower was a marvel of engineering, adapted to the unique challenges of Pacific combat. Early designs were heavy, unwieldy, and limited in range, but refinements allowed operators to project streams of burning fuel 20-40 yards with accuracy. Fuel tanks, worn as backpacks, fed the nozzle through reinforced hoses, enabling sustained bursts of flame into bunkers and tunnels. Engineers focused on portability, reliability, and safety, ensuring that operators could advance under fire without catastrophic risk. The weapon's design leveraged both physics and human psychology. It reached into confined spaces where bullets could not penetrate and projected a continuous threat that instilled fear. This combination of range, precision, and psychological impact made the flamethrower uniquely effective in the Pacific context, where terrain and fortification had historically nullified conventional weaponry. Its evolution reflected a broader pattern of innovation under pressure, demonstrating how technical mastery could redefine battlefield dynamics. Commanders on both sides quickly recognized the implications of the flamethrower. American leaders incorporated it into assault plans, emphasizing coordination, operator protection, and timing to exploit enemy vulnerabilities. Training emphasized calm under fire, decision-making under stress, and understanding the psychological effect on defenders. Japanese leaders, conversely, faced a weapon they could neither neutralize nor easily counter. Orders to reinforce bunkers, construct escape routes, or create thicker walls often failed against the relentless advance of fire. Leaders had to contend with panic spreading among troops, discipline breaking down, and morale collapsing even in positions that had previously been considered safe. In this dynamic, leadership was tested not just by strategy, but by the capacity to manage fear among both operators and defenders. Decisions in the field often determined whether a flamethrower assault would succeed with minimal casualties or descend into chaotic slaughter. From the Japanese perspective, flamethrowers represented a weapon that defied conventional countermeasures. Soldiers who had trained for years to endure bullets, artillery, and grenades suddenly faced a force that could reach into every corner of their defenses. Accounts from survivors describe the helplessness inside reinforced bunkers as walls became infernos, smoke choked the air, and escape routes vanished under advancing fire. The weapon shattered confidence, undermining discipline and camaraderie. Even experienced troops, conditioned to remain calm under assault, were often overwhelmed by the primal fear of being burned alive. This fear translated into tactical disadvantages. Defenders abandoned positions prematurely, misfired in panic, or exposed themselves to follow-up attacks. Japanese commanders attempted adaptations, reinforcing bunkers with thicker walls, digging multiple tunnels, or creating makeshift fire-retardant measures, but these were rarely sufficient. The flamethrower had exploited a vulnerability that no bullet or bomb could, transforming previously secure fortifications into sites of terror. It was a weapon that attacked both body and mind, and its presence on the battlefield forced a re-evaluation of Japanese defensive doctrine. Beyond the physical destruction, flamethrowers carried a moral and psychological weight that few other weapons could match. For the attacking troops, operating the flamethrower required confronting the ethical implications of a weapon designed to incinerate and terrify. Many Marines later described a mixture of fear and grim satisfaction, knowing they could neutralize a threat while simultaneously observing the visceral reaction it provoked. For the defenders, the psychological impact was immediate and profound. Fire triggers an instinctive survival response. The knowledge that no bunker, tunnel, or pillbox offered complete protection created relentless anxiety. This pressure often caused defenders to act irrationally, abandoning well-fortified positions or surrendering prematurely. On the battlefield, the flamethrower became a tool not only of destruction, but of psychological domination, a device that turned natural fear into a force multiplier. In a broader sense, it demonstrated how warfare had evolved. Modern combat was no longer just about bullets and strategy, but about understanding and manipulating human instinct. By instilling terror, flamethrowers reshaped engagements, forced tactical adaptation, and left a lasting imprint on soldiers' minds long after the battle ended. February 19, 1945. The Marines of the 4th Division landed on the volcanic slopes of Iwo Jima, a jagged island that had become one of the most heavily fortified positions in the Pacific. Japanese defenders had spent months carving an intricate network of tunnels, bunkers, and pillboxes into the black volcanic rock. For weeks, U.S. planners had anticipated heavy resistance, but nothing could have prepared them for the determination and sheer ingenuity of the Japanese defensive positions. Every hill, ridge, and cave had been transformed into a trap, a nest of deadly firepower waiting for the first assaulting wave. As the initial infantry squads advanced, machine gun fire raked the beaches, and artillery shells exploded against bunkers. The defenders initially held firm, But it was here that flamethrower teams would demonstrate their decisive value. Operators, carrying the heavy M2 units strapped to their backs, advanced with a measured determination. Each step was a calculated risk. A misstep could ignite their own fuel, yet hesitation would leave Marines exposed to enemy fire. Moving from cover to cover, they unleashed bursts of flame into bunker entrances, forcing Japanese soldiers to either flee into the open or risk immolation. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Bunkers that had repelled rifle and artillery fire for hours were neutralized within minutes. Japanese soldiers, who had hunkered down with a grim resolve, scrambled through tunnels and ventilation shafts, often finding themselves exposed to American rifles or hand grenades as they fled. In several cases, entire defensive positions collapsed not from conventional firepower, but from the relentless advance of flames. Reports from the field described scenes of chaos. Smoke-filled bunkers, defenders shouting and disoriented, and Marines methodically moving forward to secure positions once considered impregnable. Flamethrowers also enabled coordinated assaults that minimized American casualties. Instead of prolonged frontal attacks, engineers and infantry could suppress remaining defenders while flamethrower teams cleared the fortifications. This combination of fire, maneuver, and psychological pressure turned the tide on terrain that would otherwise have stalled any advance. On this small island, with its steep cliffs and volcanic craters, the weapon's precision and intensity became a force multiplier, allowing relatively small squads to achieve objectives that had previously required entire battalions. The turning point was not just physical, it was moral. Japanese defenders, trained to endure extreme hardship, faced a new terror that undermined their will to fight. Even veteran soldiers abandoned positions in moments of panic, creating gaps in the defensive line. The flamethrower had changed the rules of engagement. It was no longer sufficient to rely on walls, tunnels, or concealment. The American assault, guided by careful coordination and technological innovation, had introduced an element of fear so profound that it reshaped the dynamics of the battlefield. The intensity of the confrontation escalated as day gave way to night. Smoke hung over the volcanic ridges, illuminated by bursts of fire from flamethrowers. The air was thick with heat, ash, and the cries of combatants caught between the advancing flames and the unrelenting Marine squads. Commanders on both sides recognized that the decisive moment had arrived. Positions that had seemed unassailable were now vulnerable, and the rhythm of battle had shifted irrevocably in favor of the attackers. The use of flamethrowers on Iwo Jima exemplified their strategic value across the Pacific. Islands that had long resisted capture succumbed to a combination of innovation, coordination, and psychological dominance. The weapon's ability to neutralize fortifications, compel surrender, and minimize attacker casualties made it a turning point in multiple engagements. By the time the sun set over the black volcanic ridges, the initial lines of Japanese defense had crumbled under the dual force of fire and methodical infantry assault. The success of this operation was not isolated. Flamethrowers would continue to play a decisive role in subsequent assaults on fortified positions, demonstrating that human ingenuity and technical innovation could overcome even the most resilient defenses. As the Marines secured their first objectives on Iwo Jima, it became clear that the introduction of this weapon had permanently altered the nature of island combat in the Pacific. The next section will continue this narrative, detailing the final push, destruction of bunkers, and the immediate aftermath for Japanese troops, where the full effect of the flamethrower is revealed. As the battle for Iwo Jima intensified, the flamethrowers proved their decisive role in breaking the remaining Japanese resistance. By February 21, American forces had pushed deeper into the volcanic ridges, where tunnels and fortified pillboxes twisted like a labyrinth. Here, defenders had once believed themselves invincible, confident that the rocky terrain and complex fortifications would render any assault futile. The reality was far different. Flamethrower teams, supported by rifle squads and grenadiers, advanced methodically, isolating each bunker and eliminating escape routes with searing streams of fire. Inside the labyrinth of tunnels, Japanese soldiers faced the full horror of the weapon. Thick smoke filled every passage, reducing visibility to few feet. The roar of flames reverberated off the volcanic walls, disorienting defenders and driving them toward exits where American troops waited. Many attempted to flee through narrow tunnels, only to encounter hand grenades or suppressive fire. Others, trapped by the advancing fire, surrendered or were forced into lethal confrontations. Observers noted the psychological collapse of units that had, until that point, resisted repeated bombardments. The flamethrower had not merely destroyed fortifications, it had shattered the cohesion and morale of defenders who had trained to hold their positions at all costs. By mid-morning on February 22, entire defensive sectors that had been planned as strongholds were reduced to charred ruins. Marines reported bunkers still partially intact, but filled with smoke and flames, forcing the defenders out of hiding. Coordination between flamethrower teams, infantry, and tank support ensured minimal exposure for attacking forces. Positions that might have required days to secure fell within hours. The battlefield had been transformed. What had once been a stalemate now became a fluid, controlled advance. Commanders observed that the psychological impact extended beyond immediate engagements. Japanese troops, witnessing the relentless use of flames, became increasingly reluctant to hold forward positions. Small pockets of resistance collapsed faster than anticipated. Even well-entrenched snipers abandoned their posts rather than face the advancing fire. In operational reports, officers described scenes of panic, disorganized retreats, and diminished effectiveness across units. The flamethrower had achieved a level of dominance unmatched by conventional weapons, fundamentally altering the conduct of battle in confined, fortified spaces. The climactic intensity reached its peak as Marines approached Hill 362, one of the final strongholds on the southern sector of the island. Bunkers embedded deep in volcanic rock, interconnected by tunnels, had repelled numerous assaults. Flamethrower teams, moving with precision under heavy fire, cleared each position systematically. Streams of fuel-seared wooden supports and barricades, cutting off defensive positions and flushing soldiers from cover. By the afternoon, the hill had been neutralized. The American forces had turned the tide not through sheer numbers, but through calculated innovation and exploitation of fear, using fire as both a weapon and a psychological lever. The capture of these final positions demonstrated a profound tactical lesson. The flamethrower was more than a tool of destruction. It created conditions where defenders, previously considered invincible, were rendered vulnerable by the combination of heat, smoke, and primal fear. Operations that had previously stagnated now progressed rapidly, casualties among attacking forces were reduced, and momentum shifted decisively. The turning point of Iwo Jima and many other Pacific Island battles was not merely the seizure of terrain, but the undeniable demonstration of how a single technological innovation could redefine combat. As night fell over the island, the survivors of Japanese units retreated into remaining tunnels, their morale shattered, their positions compromised. The cost of resistance had risen exponentially. The flamethrower had rewritten the rules of engagement. Its presence on the battlefield symbolized a decisive shift in both strategy and human psychology, foreshadowing the eventual collapse of entrenched defenses across the Pacific. The immediate aftermath of Iwo Jima revealed the full impact of flamethrowers on both the battlefield and the psychology of combatants. American forces had secured key objectives with far fewer casualties than initial estimates had predicted. Bunkers that had been considered nearly impregnable were reduced to charred rubble, tunnels that had shielded Japanese soldiers for months were rendered useless, and the defenders' morale was shattered. Command reports highlighted how positions previously believed to require prolonged bombardment were neutralized in hours through the combination of flamethrower deployment, coordinated infantry maneuvers, and supporting fire. In operational terms, the weapon proved its value as both a tactical and strategic asset, validating the months of training, innovation, and planning that had preceded the assault. For Japanese forces, the consequences were immediate and severe. The psychological toll was as significant as the physical destruction. Soldiers who survived the initial wave of attacks were often found in a state of shock, disoriented by the relentless heat, smoke, and flames that had consumed their defenses. Many units had fragmented, abandoning positions and losing cohesion. Tactical coordination broke down as soldiers prioritized survival over orders, rendering even experienced units ineffective. Reports from Japanese officers, later recovered, indicate that the flamethrower was perceived as a weapon beyond conventional defense, one that could penetrate bunkers, flush soldiers from tunnels, and induce a terror that undermined discipline. Numbers tell a stark story. Entire pillboxes and bunkers, previously stocked with ammunition and supplies, were rendered inoperable. Casualties mounted not only from direct confrontation, but from suffocating smoke and panic-induced mistakes. In several sectors, defenders attempting to escape flames were exposed to American rifle and grenade fire, amplifying losses. These outcomes reinforced the dual nature of the weapon. It inflicted both direct and indirect casualties, while also serving as a psychological lever that increased the effectiveness of every accompanying infantry maneuver. The strategic consequences extended beyond the immediate battlefield. U.S. military planners, recognizing the efficiency of flamethrowers in neutralizing entrenched positions, integrated the weapon more systematically into assault operations across the Pacific. Flamethrowers became a standard component of island-hopping campaigns, ensuring that American forces could penetrate even the most fortified positions with reduced risk to personnel. This adaptation not only accelerated the pace of operations, but also reshaped the planning of future engagements, emphasizing the value of psychological as well as physical dominance in combat. The battlefield itself bore the mark of the flamethrower's presence. Once impenetrable fortifications were left blackened and smoldering. Equipment, stockpiles, and defensive structures were destroyed, leaving nothing of value behind. For the Marines who had advanced with the weapon, the terrain appeared simultaneously conquered and scarred, a stark reminder of both the destructive power of technology and the human cost of conflict. These images, vivid and haunting, would endure in after-action reports, training manuals, and historical accounts, cementing the flamethrower's reputation as a decisive factor in Pacific operations. The final implication of the aftermath was psychological. Japanese defenders and American attackers alike internalized the presence of a weapon that transcended conventional warfare. For Americans, flamethrowers became a symbol of ingenuity, coordination, and battlefield mastery. For the Japanese, they represented an unavoidable threat that could undermine courage, discipline, and strategy alike. The battlefield had shifted, not merely in territory, but in the dynamics of fear, morale, and human behavior under fire. Beyond the immediate battlefield, the deployment of flamethrowers in the Pacific had far-reaching strategic consequences. Commanders on both sides quickly recognized that these weapons were not simply tactical tools, they were instruments capable of reshaping the operational landscape. For American forces, the success of flamethrowers validated a doctrine that combined technology, coordination, and psychological impact. By integrating flamethrower teams with infantry, engineers, and armored support, the U.S. military could systematically dismantle Japanese fortifications that had previously resisted months of bombardment and costly assaults. This adaptation accelerated the pace of island-hopping campaigns, allowing forces to achieve objectives with greater efficiency and fewer casualties, while also providing a model for the use of specialized weapons in confined or fortified environments. Japanese military planners, conversely, faced a new reality. The weapon had exposed a critical vulnerability. No matter how well prepared a defensive position, the combination of fire and psychological terror could overcome fortifications and break morale. Reports from surviving officers describe a pervasive sense of helplessness and the need to reconsider defensive strategies in light of flamethrowers' effectiveness. Tactics that had been reliable against artillery or small arms were no longer sufficient. As a result, Japanese forces increasingly sought to disperse positions, create alternative defensive lines, and rely on ambush tactics rather than static fortifications. While these adaptations could slow American advances, they could not negate the weapon's transformative impact on morale and battlefield psychology. The psychological dimension of flamethrower deployment extended beyond the immediate combatants. For American troops, the weapon instilled a sense of operational confidence, allowing squads to approach fortified positions with a tactical advantage and a clear plan for neutralization. The presence of flamethrower teams reduced hesitation and risk during assaults, fostering cohesion and calculated aggression. For the Japanese, the knowledge that no bunker, tunnel, or pillbox offered guaranteed protection created persistent anxiety, undermining both strategic planning and combat effectiveness. The weapon thus became a force multiplier not solely through physical destruction, but through its ability to shape human behavior under extreme conditions. Strategically, the success of flamethrowers informed future operations. Military planners documented the lessons learned, the importance of integrating specialized weapons with standard infantry tactics, the value of psychological leverage in combat, and the necessity of adaptability in assaulting complex fortifications. These lessons would influence subsequent engagements throughout the Pacific, from the Mariana Islands to Okinawa. In each case, flamethrowers proved their worth not only by clearing terrain, but by eroding the resolve of defenders, demonstrating that innovation could redefine the balance of power even in the most challenging environments. Finally, the aftermath left an enduring imprint on the historical record. Flamethrowers became synonymous with both effectiveness and terror. For the soldiers who wielded them, they represented precision, courage, and calculated strategy. For those who faced them, they symbolized vulnerability, fear, and the inexorable force of modern warfare. The weapon's dual impact, tactical and psychological, ensured that its legacy extended far beyond the battlefields of Iwo Jima and Saipan, shaping the broader conduct of Pacific operations and redefining the role of technology in human conflict. The successful deployment of flamethrowers had thus changed more than territory or casualty counts. It had reshaped the nature of combat, altered strategies, and left a lasting mark on both the victors and the vanquished. As the battles subsided and the smoke cleared, the lessons of fire, fear, and tactical innovation endured, setting the stage for reflection on the human, technological, and historical significance of this weapon. The next section will be the reflection/closure, a calm, cinematic conclusion exploring what the use of flamethrowers ultimately meant for history, warfare, and humanity. Flamethrowers left a mark on the Pacific War that extended beyond charred bunkers and scorched terrain. They were more than a weapon, they were a revelation in human conflict, demonstrating how innovation could exploit both physical and psychological vulnerabilities. In the dense jungles and volcanic ridges of Iwo Jima, Saipan, and countless other islands, flames became the silent arbiter of life and death, forcing soldiers to confront a fear older than armies themselves, the primal dread of fire. For the defenders, the experience was transformative. Training, discipline, and courage, hallmarks of Japanese military ethos, proved insufficient against a weapon that penetrated every corner of their fortifications and every recess of the mind. Morale crumbled as the flames advanced, leaving survivors grappling with the terror of helplessness. For American forces, the flamethrower represented mastery of both technology and human psychology. It was a testament to calculated strategy, rigorous training, and the understanding that warfare was as much about shaping the enemy's response as it was about destroying positions. The broader lesson extends beyond this one conflict. Flamethrowers embodied the intersection of ingenuity, necessity, and fear. They highlighted the relentless evolution of war, how a single innovation could redefine tactics, reshape strategies, and alter the human experience on the battlefield. In the Pacific theater, they accelerated operations, minimized casualties for attackers, and left an indelible psychological impact on defenders. Yet they also forced reflection on the human cost of such technological supremacy. Fire, elemental and indiscriminate, left nothing untouched, a stark reminder of both the power and the responsibility inherent in warfare. Ultimately, the story of flamethrowers is a story of adaptation and consequence. They exemplify how technology, when combined with courage, coordination, and insight, can transform the landscape of combat. But they also underscore a timeless truth. In every advance, every strategy, every innovation, the human element remains at the heart of warfare. Fear, resilience, and the instinct to survive shape history as much as bullets, bombs, or fire ever could. Flamethrowers, in their terrifying efficiency, revealed the fragility of even the most fortified positions and the enduring power of human ingenuity, and they remain a haunting emblem of the Pacific War's brutal, relentless nature.